Well, after all that, I can scarcely wait to hear what I'm going to say. This ought to be good. Always wonderful to come here to Colonial to see this ministry. And I noticed this morning when I looked at my date book that I'm already scheduled to be here next year, which is remarkable that they actually invite such old people to minister here. As a matter of fact, there is something good about old age. I told some of you about it, and that is it doesn't last very long. So we're thankful for the opportunity. And because I have so much to cover, I'm going to plunge right in. As Dave mentioned, I've written a new book entitled We Will Not Be Silenced, Responding Courageously to Our Culture's Assault on Christianity. This is not the book, it's a markup of the book, mock-up I should say, and it is what the title and what the cover is going to be like. And it is available in 2 weeks. David Jeremiah, who wrote the intro, says, if I could, I would put this into the hands of every Christian in America. I know that it's very difficult for an author to talk about his own stuff, but I do it somewhat willingly. But I have to say that I feel very deeply about this book. By the way, Dave Jeremiah also says in the intro, read every paragraph, every line, every word. And if you would like to make sure that you get a copy as soon as it comes out, Moody Church should be receiving these in 2 weeks' time. Remember the way you can do it. I did it this afternoon. You go to MCM Offer. MCM stands, of course, for Moody Church Media, but MCM Offer is all one word, without any period in between, without any dot, mcmoffer.com, and there for a gift of any amount, it can be yours, and as soon as it comes out, we'll make sure that it gets sent to you. Let me begin by saying that the left, and I'm going to talk about the left, and that isn't necessarily liberalism. Liberalism always believed in freedom of thought. The left does not. So I'm going to talk about the left, and when I do, I'm speaking really about the radical left. That's probably the terminology that I'm going to be using in this next few moments, and we have to hurry because we have a lot to cover. What I'm actually going to do is take you through chapter by chapter, give you the heading, give you the essence, and then move on. Remember this, that the radical left does not believe that America can be fixed. It must be destroyed. And on the rubble of its Christian Judeo heritage, a new America will arise. It'll be an America that is free of racism, white privilege, income inequality, and all of the mistakes of the past and the racism of the past will just be read about in history books. If you ask what fuels this, I have to tell you that Karl Marx still rules from the grave. Marx looked around and he noticed that there was a lot of oppression. There was no doubt about that. Factory workers were being oppressed and misused. And so his view was that if the state took over everything, if the state had supremacy, it could dole out all of its blessings, and to do so with a key word here, equality. So as you know, Marxism has the view of the superiority of the state over the individual, over what he and she believes, and that kind of authority in communist countries is unquestioned. But standing in the way of this utopia was the nuclear family. Marx looked at this, and especially Lenin, and concluded that the family was a unit of oppression that needed to be broken up. Because after all, wives were being oppressed by their husbands, children were being oppressed by their parents, and furthermore, something else, rich parents would pass on their inheritance to their children, and that meant that those children had a benefit that others didn't, and that was contrary to equality. So the family had to be broken up. He argued that women had to go into the workforce. You know, Lenin said, how can we have a free country if 1/2 of the population is ensnared in the kitchen, is enslaved in the kitchen? And so to him, he wanted to eliminate all oppression, and God was the ultimate oppressor. Now, when Marxism came to Russia, and I know that we have a brother here from Russia with whom I met this morning, there was an overthrow that was terribly bloody, and people hated their rulers. So cultural Marxism says, you know what, we can achieve a Marxist nation without all that blood. We will do it by capturing the institutions that govern it, like education, the media, and law, and economics, so that you can actually vote for cultural Marxists, and the Marxist state can be brought about, and everybody will love it, and they'll see its advantage. And the end result will be no oppression, because remember, for Marx, oppression is the key to history. Now, that's discussed in the first chapter of my book, and now follows 8 chapters in which I talk about the assault that the Christian church is now facing. And by the way, at the end of each chapter, I give a response of the church. Because of lack of time today, I'll omit that in many of the chapters, but all that is there. So the next chapter is entitled, Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Rewrite the past to control the future. Do you remember George Orwell in 1984, that novel that I read back in 1984, where the Ministry of Truth was responsible for making sure that the truth of history harmonized with the present regime. So history had to be rewritten to make it fit. And so the Ministry of Truth is operative today in America, because what we have is something that is very clear, and that is a desire to vilify the past, to build something brand new on the future. And so the past must be vilified. This, of course, happened in China during the time of Chairman Mao. You remember how he broke down monuments and burned Western books and renamed cities. All of us, some of us who are older, even remember when St. Petersburg in Russia was at one time Leningrad and then Stalingrad. Each had to destroy the culture and the history of the one previous to build something new. Now, I can understand that Confederate monuments are oftentimes very offensive to many people in the black community. I get that, and even if they were taken down, I would understand that. But there's a lot more going on than that. George Floyd and the murder that took place was a pretext not just to combat racism, but to bring about revolution. And while we're talking about that, let's mention Black Lives Matter. Do Black Lives Matter? Of course Black Lives Matter. As a matter of fact, all Black Lives Matter. In fact, David Dorn, who was shot as a black man in St. Louis when there was a riot sponsored by Black Lives Matter, his life mattered, and the number of black lives that are oftentimes shot on the Chicago streets, they all matter. So let us be very clear that every black life matters. Black lives matter. But the organization that uses that mantra is deeply Marxist. That's what one of its founders said, and obviously it's true. And have you gone to its website? Its website says, we believe in the dismantling of the nuclear family and so forth. So what we're facing today is not just racism, but revolution, and the destruction of the monuments is symbolic of the destruction of the institutions that made America what it is. Now, racism is awful. Slavery is terrible. If you read some of those stories, it's enough to make a stone weep. So nobody is defending racism, nor are they defending such things as slavery and its ongoing impact. We get all that. But the fact is that you send your students, your kids, to university, and they come back hating America because they are told that America is the most racist nation, and what we have to do is to combat it because it is a nation that is steeped in racism and capitalism. Isn't that interesting? What your students are not told in university is that there are today, as I speak, 40 million slaves in the world, primarily in India, in Africa, and throughout the Middle East. Still 40 million. To listen to the cultural warriors talk, you would think that the Western world invented racism. Thanks be to God, because of Wilberforce in England and so forth, and what happened here in America, we have put an end to slavery, for example. And as I mentioned, there are 40,000 slaves. 40,000? 40 million throughout the world. Now, standing in the way of the revolution is the Constitution of the United States with its freedoms. And the Constitution has to be changed. Come with me this year to January. The Harvard Review had an article entitled "Pack the Union." It was an article that was intended to help people to see how the Constitution can be changed. And what this article said is that the Washington, D.C., because of its districts, could be made into 127 different states. And it even said they reliably vote Democratic so that the House of Representatives could be overwhelmed with those who have a leftist point of view. Isn't that interesting? And they don't even hide what they intend to do after that regarding immigration and all the rest. And then, of course, you have the packing of the courts, which we are hearing about right now, and all these things. So the Constitution must be changed. And by the way, did America actually begin in 1619 like the New York Times said it did, and that project that showed that America was based on racism and capitalism, when the slaves came and the plantation owners began to use slavery? I wonder if they're going to rewrite the history of other countries as to when they began to have racism. I can assure you they will not. This is a targeted project intending to make America look bad. You cannot get people to hate America if you compare it with other countries. So Saul Alinsky and others said that America should never be compared with other countries because it comes off looking too good when you want to vilify what happened in the past. Arthur Schlesinger, who was a historian and also a confidant of President Kennedy's, said that, and this is a tremendous quote, he said, "History is to a nation what memory is to an individual." So if an individual loses his memory, he doesn't know who he is, and he becomes whatever people say that he is. In the very same way, they want us to forget what it means to be an American. Let me even use this illustration. If you leave a building and walk, and you look back, you can see the house from which you came. But if you turn a corner and you look back, you don't see that house, you see something else. America has turned a corner. And therefore, if we look back to the past, it has to be a negative past, and we have to look forward now to a past that will lead us into the glories of equality, which I'm going to discuss in just a moment. Now, in the midst of all of this, the question is, what does the church do? Well, I'm just going to mention this quickly, and then we've got a lot to cover here today. And my responsibility is to speak, yours is to listen, and I have been praying that we shall end at the same time. What the Church of Jesus Christ is going to have to learn is this: The church ultimately was not based on the American Constitution. It was based upon Jesus Christ, who said, "Upon this rock." And when Jesus said that in Caesarea Philippi, he was standing in an area where it was the seat of paganism. So we're going to have to learn that we aren't going to have all of those support structures that America has lovingly given us. Things are going to get very difficult unless there's a huge turnaround, and we're going to learn again what it means for the church to be dependent on Jesus in a way that we've not had to learn before. So that's all chapter 2. Now we get to the good part. Number 3, use diversity to divide. This is very important. Use diversity to divide and to destroy. Well, come with me to Chicago, where Saul Alinsky worked as a community organizer. He wrote a book, and you probably have read it. It's entitled Rules for Radicals, dedicated to Lucifer, the first radical whom we must honor because he established his own kingdom. Saul Alinsky taught that you should not try to solve problems. Through the providence of God, I met a man who was vacationing in Colorado at the same time we were, who was one of Alinsky's assistants. And he said, we had wonderful plans to help the marginalized communities of Chicago, and Saul Alinsky blocked them. Because he said the goal is not trying to solve these problems. The goal is trying to use these problems to bring about what he called the glories of the Marxist state. And if people are satisfied, it's difficult to do. So what you want to do is to bring the races into constant, unresolved conflict. And therefore, what we're going to see is to take Marxism, which was originally, of course, primarily economic, and now we apply it to race. And so what you have is, and I have to talk very briefly about Marxist view of equality. You know, today we have marriage equality, which of course is same-sex marriage. We have gender equality. We have reproductive equality, which means abortion. Everybody's into equality. I have to throw this in at no extra charge. No offering is going to be taken because of this. Did you know that the Bible does not teach income equality? And God doesn't even treat everybody alike. He didn't treat Hammurabi the way he treated Abraham. And Jesus told a story in which there were a number of different people who were given various amounts of money, 10 talents, 5 talents, and so forth. Of course we should work to bring about income equality. That's not my point. My point is it cannot be achieved under a Marxist rubric, as I'll show in a moment if I have time. Now, if your students go to university, they are going to find out that there are many classes on what is known as social justice. Now, when somebody says they are into social justice, we have to listen carefully. Maybe they are just talking about the implications of the gospel, namely taking care of the poor, representing the marginalized, equality under the law. All of those things are mentioned in the Bible. Long lists of passages in the Bible have to do with social justice. But that's not the teaching of social justice that you are getting in university today. Now, I didn't know until this morning, sitting back there, and I always keep my eye on the ones on the back row, by the way, just so that you know. I didn't know that until Dave mentioned that following this, there's going to be a professor who's going to talk about critical race theory. I didn't know that, so I hope that he agrees with me. And if he doesn't, you go with him and not me, okay? Because I'm just a farm boy from Saskatchewan, Canada, and he's a professor here. So let's treat him with the reverence that is due him. Critical race theory is based on a Marxist notion of the oppressed and the oppressors. So if you are white, you're an oppressor, and you have white privilege. You may be born in the poorest white home, in the worst possible neighborhood, in poverty, but because you are white, you are indeed privileged. If you're a black American, you're not privileged even if you make millions of dollars, like many very successful black Americans do, still because it's a matter of race. It depends where you belong versus oppressed and oppressor. And so the whole idea is that we are put into these different categories, and we have to just confess. We have to confess the horrors of whiteness because we are the oppressors. Now, I know that I'm going where angels fear to tread, but hey, we're flying back to Chicago tomorrow, so. The fact is that just speaking the way I am is going to be interpreted by some people as racism because I'm just displaying my white fragility, you understand. But the fact is that there is no real room for forgiveness or reconciliation. These categories are set up, remember Saul Alinsky, not to solve problems, but to use them to bring about constant conflict among the races. And the goal, of course, is that the oppressed eventually have so much power that they can have cultural dominance and such things as entitlements, etc. And this has huge implications because it also means that there is really no objective truth in interpreting the Bible or the Constitution because we are all bringing our whiteness to it. We are all bringing our race to it. And so what we have to do is to listen to the oppressed. By the way, did you know that arithmetic even is going woke? In the Seattle school system, they said, we're going to teach arithmetic and show how racist it is. Now, you know, back in the days when I went to school, after the Earth's crust was scarcely hard, we never, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, and you just moved on. But now arithmetic is going woke. Not even Saul Alinsky in his wildest dreams could have thought of a way to keep the races in perpetual conflict without resolution. I asked a black American who attends Moody Church, who calls himself a true African American because he was born in Ghana but raised on the south side of Chicago. I asked him, what do you think about the issues that are being taught today, social justice issues? And this is a quote now. He said, we are growing farther and farther apart. And he says, there can't be reconciliation until whites meet certain standards. And because those standards are impossible, he says, the standoff continues. And I point out also that really the issue is the family. A man by the name of Theodore Dalrymple wrote a book on the permanent underclass. And he says that this is not a racial statement at all. Across every culture, where there's a culture where 70% of the children are born out of wedlock, he said, and there's drugs and all the other stuff, he says you will have a permanent underclass no matter how much money you put into it. Now, I can't leave this without talking about the church. This really excites me. What is the answer to racial conflict? At Moody Church, we rejoiced in the fact that on a Sunday morning, we had more than 70 countries of origin represented. And that continues today, though, of course, because of COVID, the church isn't meeting and so forth. And to us, I used to tell the people at Moody Church, the vision for the church is found in the book of Revelation, where you have people from every tongue and nation and country all before the throne. Here's where Christianity answers the whole social justice and critical race theories. Christianity says we have a lot more in common than we realize. Because we are all sinners standing at the foot of the cross in great need of redemption, and having been redeemed now by Christ and made one in Christ, now we say, no matter what the color of your skin is, let's work together to help minister to broken communities and ask God what we can do to help the poor, the marginalized, and so forth. So that I was going to read this passage to you, but you can find it in the book of Colossians, as well as Ephesians chapter 2, of course, where the Apostle Paul makes it very clear. He says that in Christ there's neither Jew nor Greek, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, they were not widely liked, Scythian, and they, of course, also were people that were marginalized. Paul says, in Christ, you are all one. The greatest hope for America and all of the racial tension rests in the church of Jesus Christ and the cross and the oneness that God delights in us because of his grace. All right, now let's hurry on to the next chapter. Freedom of speech for me, but not for thee. Where did the idea come from that we should not have freedom of speech? Well, Marxism. Marcuse, you know, I remember in the 60s he was alive, and I remember him. I didn't know much about him. But he was a Marxist who said, look, we're losing the war. Capitalists are winning. So what we have to do is to not give freedom of speech to capitalists. It is time for the oppressed to speak, and the capitalists should keep their mouths shut. And there are books being written today who mouth that particular theory. The idea is this, that the oppressors have had freedom of speech long enough. What we must do is to close their mouths so that the oppressed finally get their chance to speak. And that's what happens at the university campuses. And that's why somebody who read the manuscript and interviewed me said, you know, that's interesting. You're giving the philosophical arguments for a lack of freedom of speech. And I said, yeah, I am, because people think that philosophers are people who spin ideas in ivory towers, and they have no idea how it impacts society. And so what we must do, you know, we're so critical of the church in Germany. Some of you know that I've written a book on Germany and Hitler and so forth, and we say, where was the church? I don't think we would do any better. When I saw the submission of Christians to the cultural currents that we've experienced in the last few months, how they kept their mouths shut or bowed, I said, I don't think that we would have the strength to stand against a regime like Hitler's. And so, you know, I mean, again, I'm skipping all kinds of things here, but look at the Philadelphia Inquirer. The editor allowed an article to be published entitled, Buildings Matter Too. The idea was that, yeah, lives are more important than buildings, but the desecration of buildings during these riots, they matter too. He was fired. Look at Drew Brees, who said that he wanted to stand for the flag. He apologized not once but twice. So what we have in our society today is cancel culture, which says, oh, we have the First Amendment. You can say whatever you like, but if you say the wrong thing, you're fired, you're canceled. And that's where we are. And the rest of this chapter gives a defense on why we need free speech, and then looks to the book of Acts and church history to show how the Church of Jesus Christ has had to defend itself in the midst of societies and regimes where there was no freedom of speech, but they paid the price anyway, and they said, we are going to stand here. One of my heroes, don't get me off on it, is Martin Luther. Hier stehe ich kann nicht anderes. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. God give us Christians like that. Well, the next chapter is on propaganda. Give it a noble cause. The purpose of propaganda is to so shape people's thinking about reality that even though they are faced with a mountain of evidence, they will not change their minds. You know, Churchill is quoted as saying, the desire to believe something is much more powerful than rational argument. And so how does propaganda work? Well, that's a long story, but, you know, the gay rights movement in 1980 wrote a book on how they were going to change America's minds about homosexuality, and they have been eminently successful. But one of the things that they say is this, that we followed Hitler's view of propaganda. Now, I've read Hitler's view of propaganda and so forth, and Hitler says that with the right use of propaganda, you can make heaven appear like hell and hell like heaven. So how does propaganda work? First of all, it works through two emotions, hatred. In Hitler's case, it was hate the Jews. Today, it seems to be hate Christians because they are the oppressors. Hatred and fear. Fear that if you do not bow to the regime, you will be canceled. The demonization of those who don't submit. Hitler says, I reserve emotion for the masses, but reason only for the few. In other words, you can rile up a crowd and you can get them angry very easily, and then you can use fear to keep them in line. The other thing that happens is, of course, you use euphemisms. Hitler never said, I'm starving children. I mean, that's too direct. Hitler says, we're putting children on a low-calorie diet. Oh, okay. He never talked about killing the Jews. He talked about the cleansing of the land. We're just cleansing the land as we round up Jews and take them to concentration camps. Look at today. Does any politician say, I believe that a mother has a right to kill her preborn infant? Of course not. I believe in the right to choose. I believe that she has the right to terminate a pregnancy. That sounds so innocuous, but actually it's the killing of a preborn infant. So what happens is this takes place. Now, another thing that happens, Christians often fall for in propaganda, is the word love. You know, what's wrong if two men love each other? Don't we need more love than less? When Harry and Meghan were married in Westminster Chapel, you remember the preacher there, who is a great preacher, but who believes in same-sex marriage, says, wherever there is love, there is God. Heresy. When Adam and Eve sinned, they didn't stop loving. They just started to love the wrong things. Lovers of pleasure, lovers of God, lovers of themselves, lovers of money. It's not true that wherever there is love, there is God. Herein is love, that you keep my commandments. So we need to make sure that we are aware of the fact of how certain things are sold. For example, same-sex marriage, to get back to it again, was sold as a civil right. You know, we hitch it to the civil rights umbrella, and that's the way in which it was passed off onto us. What we must do is to realize that through all of this, we have to think clearly and ask ourselves, how are we submitting to propaganda today in a way that is shaping our thinking through the media and other ways so that we are not thinking clearly? And then I talk about the church for the need not to have false advertising. You know, Helmut Tillicke, I have to tell you the story. He was a college student driving through Germany, and he said he was so hungry he skipped breakfast. He was on his bicycle. He came to a shop that says hot rolls. He said he got off of his bicycle and he could already feel the saliva coming into his mouth. And he got in and discovered that it was not a hot roll shop, it was a print shop. They said the lettering that we put there is only so that we can illustrate the kind of lettering we can do. I wonder if the church does false advertising, but we must hurry on. The next chapter is entitled Sexualize the Children. The cell phone in your teenager's hand will do more to shape his or her view of culture and value than going to church on Sunday and listening to an hour's Sunday school class, no matter how well it might be taught. Hitler says this. He said to the Germans, "You clothe the children, you feed them, but their hearts belong to the Reich." And I think today that what we are doing is we are feeding our children, we are clothing them, but their hearts belong to social media and technology. I had a mother say to me, I didn't realize that when I gave my daughter, when I gave her a cell phone, I might as well have given her her first shot of heroin. So you have things that are happening to sexualize children. Again, Marxism, destroy the family. Rootless children who even don't know who their parents are more easily led into the glories of Marxism. So what you have is, transgender dolls, drag queens. Are you acquainted with the word throuple? If you're a pastor, remember the word throuple, because I read an article that said that evangelical churches are having within them throuples, which is a threesome in marriage. Could be two men and a woman, or a woman and two men, whatever. Pedophilia. The path is being cleared. Ann Polk, who was in the lesbian world and then came out of that, was speaking at a conference that I was speaking at last year. And she said, without God in my life, I could say no. I could not say no to anything. Without God in my life, I could not say no to anything. Don't ever underestimate the depths of depravity that can be let loose because of the human heart. Now, the church has to respond to this. Every parent should know what to say to their kids if their kids come home and say, what's wrong if two men love each other, and all the rest. But we have to hurry to number 7. That is, I think that's chapter 7, isn't it? Are we all on the same page? I don't want to be like a politician who left a political rally in Chicago the other day and whispered to one of his aides, I hope that in the excitement I didn't happen to make myself clear about anything. Let's move on. Number 7 is one of my longest chapters. By the way, regarding children, don't throw your lambs to wolves. Whatever that means, schooling, God is going to hold you accountable. And I'm not telling you what to do, but you'd better seek God. Hitler says, he who controls the youth controls the future. Wow, what a challenge. Number 7, capitalism is the disease, socialism is the cure. Capitalism is based on greed. Socialism is based on need. I point out that the opposite is true. But socialism is so attractive. Free college, free health care, free all of this. And if the government can create $2.2 trillion electronically, like they did a couple of months ago, why can't it just keep on creating money and pay all of our bills? How attractive can that be? Now, the point that you need to make is simply this, that a socialism, though initially attractive, is very destructive, because in the end, as Margaret Thatcher famously said, that you run out of other people's money. And then what do? You only, I'll take time. It's like a pie. You have one pie and you divide the slices very carefully so everybody has equality. The problem is, socialists always talking about distributing money. They never talk about making it, because socialism can't make it. Because socialism needs so many different rules, it can really ultimately only survive under barbed wire and heavy guards, because it does not allow the freedom to actually create capital. So the point is that we must understand that capitalism is really the best. And who in the world believes that capitalists are greedy? But if we had socialism, where everybody got the same, suddenly all greed would be gone. Socialism institutionalizes greed. Rebecca and I were in a certain country, I'll mention it, Russia, in 1988, or a year or two before the wall fell. And we discovered that some of the doctors in the hospital were earning the same as some of the help in the hospital. But no wonder there was a shortage of doctors, but God bless them, they had equality of income, which is the big thing. You cannot have equality of income and freedom simultaneously for reasons that are very, very important. Churchill said it very wisely. Listen carefully. The great curse of capitalism is the unequal distribution of blessings. The great virtue of socialism is the equal distribution of misery. So that's where that goes. And by the way, before I leave this and go on to chapters 8, 9, and 10, why do mice die in mouse traps? It's because they don't understand why the cheese is free. Number 8, chapter 8. Join with radical Islam in its desire to destroy America. Join with radical Islam to destroy America. Isn't that interesting? Right after 9/11, when everybody was flying flags and Congress actually had the nerve to sing God Bless America, the left began to blame America. Again, because of a Marxist view, see? The only reason why people fly planes into big buildings is because they are oppressed. Take away their oppression, and they will all live with happiness and contentment. But America's the great oppressor. And by the way, that also relates to something else I discussed, but not here, and that is even global warming. You know, and if scientists say the earth is getting warmer, I mean, that's fine with me. But there's not much we can do about it because we're not the greatest polluters in the world. There are other countries. But anyway, the idea is that what we should do is to spread all of this wealth, because now think of white supremacy, think of American supremacy. The reason that America is supreme and has so much wealth is because they got rich on the backs of the poor countries. So what we have to do is to pay all that back. What better way to do it than to give them trillions of dollars? By the way, when I was talking about this, I missed immigration, but you'll have to read the book to get that, I guess. Now, a little sales pitch there, but I just am trying to clarify God's will, okay? Did you know that Islam is being taught in some of our schools, and when parents object, they are vilified? You're racist, you're a bigot, and so forth. The American Textbook Association now says that Islam has veto power over our textbooks. I've been shown some textbooks, 64 pages on the glories and beauties of Islam, 14 pages about Christianity. Christianity is imperialist, it enslaved women, and so forth. Parents, look at what your children are given and what they are being taught in school. And then you have evangelicals who enter into interfaith dialogue. Bad idea, because everyone, the imam and you, all get to say your thing without being challenged and so forth. And Americans want to believe so badly that all the religions are essentially the same and everybody's into love. So, what you find is this: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So you have two very opposing worldviews. The vision of the leftists and the vision of the Muslims are two very different visions, but for now, they are useful because they can be used together to destroy the structure of America, its Christian heritage, and its capitalism. Let's go on to chapter number 9. Vilify, vilify, vilify. Arguments are no longer settled by discussion. It's to be vilified. You not only agree with me, and you're not just disagreeing with me, you're an evil person for disagreeing with me. Coming to a church near you. Missouri, Columbia. A year ago this month, the pastor preached a message in which he said there are only two genders. It was a very loving message. He said, I know that some of you struggle with your sexual identity and so forth, but Genesis 1:27, just the kind of message that every pastor should preach. Next day, they were in the newspapers. They were on the news. They were on the front page of the Missourian, and they were being vilified for their bigotry and so forth. And, you know, the students at the university, they said, we don't know if we feel safe in a town that has a church that teaches like this. This is known as safism. You know, where you have to retreat into some place so that you can be healed from the wounds of your unappreciated victimhood. And so that's what happened. And that's what's coming to the American church. Just keep preaching, and you will see that some disgruntled person will go to the news media, and you'll make it in the evening news. Dave said I should be over soon. Dave, don't worry. I see the airstrip. People are being asked now to buckle their seats because we are going to land. But I have to tell you this, that all revelations need a pretext. The Kristallnacht, 1937, did not happen in a vacuum. The fact is that there was a Jewish student who shot a German diplomat in Paris, and Hitler sent word through Goebbels and so forth to the fire department, the police, and they said, you know, synagogues are going to burn, Jewish businesses are going to be looted, but don't intervene. I can almost imagine them saying, we want justice for Ernst. It was Ernst Roth that was killed. And so you have a pretext, and from there on, everything goes. Remember that the issue is never the issue. That was made clear by Saul Alinsky and so forth. The issue is never the issue. The issue always is to lead to revolution. That's the goal. Chapter number 10. I end with Jesus speaking to the church in Sardis. And that's the church in which he says, you have a name, that you're alive, but you're dead. Would you come with me to Sardis? You don't even need to catch a plane. I'll tell you about Sardis, okay? We were there in 2009, visiting the 7 churches of Revelation, and we discovered that there are no churches in these places, only mosques. And a very devout Muslim guide said that Islam's ability to replace the church or to crush it is proof of its superiority. This troubled me because it made Jesus look weak. And I asked God for wisdom as to what these non-existent churches have to teach the American church, and that was the small seed from which my book grew, entitled The Cross in the Presence of the Crescent. But here's the thing, Sardis, okay? What you see when you're there is churches built up against pagan mosques, not pagan mosques, but pagan temples, where there was all kinds of sexuality. So you look at that, and this was since the time of Jesus. These churches don't go back to the time of Jesus, but you look at that and you say, there's two ways to interpret that. One way is to say that the church felt at home right next to the pagan temple, and that's why they were there. Or you could say the church was there because it was the darkest place in the city, and they wanted to be where it was very dark. I think the first interpretation is probably correct. Jesus does not say expressly as to why the church was dead, but it's very clear it no longer saw the world as an enemy. It had accepted the world. And what does Jesus say there? But despite all this, you still have a few people who walk with me in light, who are worthy. That's your congregation. It's my congregation. In the midst of an era in which we are being controlled by the culture, and oftentimes not influencing it, you are indeed, worthy. And then I give in that chapter 3 things that I think Jesus would say to us today. But my time is over, so I want to end with the words of Martin Niemöller, who eventually was put into a concentration camp by Hitler and so forth, and he's speaking to his church. We have, all of us, the whole church and the whole community, we've been blown into the tempter's sieve, and he is shaking, and the wind is blowing, and now it must become manifest whether we are wheat or chaff. We must see that the calm, meditative Christianity is at an end. It is now springtime for the hopeful and expectant Christian church. It's testing time, and God is giving Satan a free hand so he may shake us up so that it may be seen what manner of men and women we are. Satan swings his sieve, and Christianity is thrown hither and thither, and he who is not ready to suffer, he who calls himself a Christian only because he thinks he'll gain something, he will be blown away like chaff by the wind. The name of the book is We Will Not Be Silenced, responding courageously to our culture's assault on Christianity. mcmoffer.com. mcmoffer.com. Of course, you can also purchase it through different outlets.